ye menda yung no palambu Maila na maye mana yung no palambu Maye menda yung no palambu Maila na maye mana yung no palambu Maila na maye mana yung no palambu La 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 la. Mama ye menda yung no palambu. Ay la na ma ye mana yung no palambu. Mama ye menda yung no palambu. Mama ye menda yung no palambu. Ay la na ma ye mana yung no palambu. Ay la na ma ye mana yung no palambu.
Hail this land of glory. We the Amazonian, special loyalty. Praises to our Savior who granted us the freedom. Allegiance to the hero who called the Lord we gather. Glory to glory, we rise and never to fall. Here in a nation, flowing with earth and holy. Glory, glory, glory to the Father for making you a nation, a joy forevermore. Ambazonia, land of freedom, you shall live in plenty, meeting our need. And your children shall be like the stars above. The Most High God being the watchman of this nation. Ambazonia, land of freedom, you shall live in plenty, meeting our need. And your children shall be like the stars above. The Most High God being the watchman of this nation.
My fellow people, the great people of Amazonia. My apologies, I have a bad voice today. And so bear with me the way that I'm going to make this address. I thank you all for taking the time to come and listen to me, for us to talk about our country, our struggle, our resistance, and why we need to accept a certain degree of pain if we want to be free. First, let me send my best wishes to our prisoners of war, those who continue to pay the ultimate price in terms of deprivation of liberty and have never blinked in the name of freedom, in the name of our independence, and in the name of our country. I salute your courage, and I thank you for your steadfastness. Your resilience continues to inspire us who are free to make sure we don't betray, to make sure we deliver for you and the millions of people of Ambazonia the independence that they deserve. I also want to thank our people who in the past 7 years have been bombarded with different tales about who they are, what they desire, and sometimes why they should remain in servitude in exchange for temporal security and hopelessness. We have confronted this immense deceit with creative ideas, education, and information on why freedom is a non-negotiable asset. We are at war, my people. This war is vicious. Through all the media channels on the ground, at the realm of diplomacy, this is a real war. And we should embrace it with respect of its difficulties and its promise. We shall not at any time undermine the difficulties ahead. We must remind ourselves on a daily basis about the nature of the beast we are confronted with, the promise we are going to deliver to our people, and educate ourselves about the challenges and obstacles that others before us have faced. La République poses an existential threat to Ambazonia, and the world has been bullied to remain silent. I would like to remind Norway in particular that they must reject the bullying from Yaoundé. Yaoundé offers nothing to Norway. Norway must be reminded also of the cost of acquiescence to tyranny and oppression. It was here in Oslo that the Oslo Peace Accord between the Palestinians and the Israelites was signed. The international community sat back, negating international law, acquiesced to bullying, and allowed a generation frustrated enough to invade Israel on the 7th of October. And the cost of that invasion is because the world allowed itself to be bullied. It forgot the foundation upon which post-1945 world was built. We have always calculated the cost of resistance. We have never sat back to calculate the cost of acquiescence. And we have seen today in the Middle East, I remind the world, today, iron domes cannot stop rockets from Lebanon. Iran can fire hundreds of unmanned drones across different countries, drones that can fly for more than 30,000 miles. Because the world acquiesced to a status quo that was unsustainable, undermined its own values, and the cost of that acquiescence is being counted in human lives, economic loss, and total destruction of socio-economic fabric of different societies. And so Norway must reject the bullying and the blackmail from Yaoundé completely. Norway must always remind itself what it did after it had successfully left Denmark and Sweden. It declared neutrality during World War II. Neutrality in the face of terror is acquiescence to the blackmail of the bully. 1940, Germany invaded Norway. As I wrote before, the king escaped to Buckingham Palace. When Hitler attacked London, the king of Norway moved to Scotland. It required underground resistance and allied forces to liberate Norway from Germany. The cost of acquiescence is high, and to refuse to take a stand with Ambazonia today, especially by those same countries that in 1961 voted for our independence, is betrayal and stupidity in the face of the knowledge we have today on what price we pay if we allow bullies to dictate the direction of international politics and international relations. The same message goes to Canada and other Western countries. Cameroon has nothing to offer than death and destruction, looting, total collapse of a state that was viable. The world must stand against such tyranny and bullying and take a stand with advocates for freedom, coexistence, and recognition of international border. This is not a plea, this is a request. It is not only going to be beneficial for Ambazonia, it is going to be beneficial for the region and for external actors. What affects Ambazonia affects every other country. The pandemic has shown that the virus can emanate from anywhere in a lab, somewhere in China, wherever it came from. It's going to shut down the entire globe, because the interconnectedness of the world today must remind us of the consequences of silence in the face of atrocities anywhere. The movement of people carries with it security risk, risk of diseases, economic imbalance, and internal threats to stability. And we must bond together as a people and say no to bullies, looters, murderers, and genociders. My fellow Ambazonians, I would like you people to calculate not only the cost of resistance, but the cost of occupation. It is very important. Ambazonia has been betrayed without consequences because we fear the cost of resistance. First by the British. January 1960, Lord Petty, Minister of State of the Colonial Office, declared that the Ambazonian people were expendable. During the Anglo-Ambazonian talks in London in October 1960, Mr. Ian MacLeod, the Secretary of State for the Colonies, declared without fear that if the plebiscite vote went in favor of joining Cameroon, arrangements will have to be made for the early termination of the trusteeship. On 1st of October 1961, Mr. Hugh Fraser, the Under-Secretary of State for the Colonies, informed the House of Commons that as he was speaking, the British government had already transferred Ambazonia to Aigio. We have continuously calculated the cost of resistance without calculating the cost of acquiescence. As Professor Carson Anyonge puts it, without any color of right, without any valid instrument or authorizing act, Cameroon assumed unwarranted jurisdiction over the people and territory of Ambazonia. In that process, exacting obedience. We acquiesce because we calculated the cost of resistance without calculating the cost of acquiescence. And yes, he continued. The people yielded to this obedience for the time being because of forcible occupation of the land and the maintenance therein of an administration of paramount force which compels obedience as a matter of necessity. Every time we fight, people ask us to calculate the cost of resistance. They tell us our people are suffering. They do not calculate the cost of obedience and acquiescence to tyranny and occupation. Let us look into the political cost. 1954 to 1961. Amazonia, self-governing territory with elected prime minister, bicameral parliament, civil service, independent judiciary. He had before Endele, Foncha, Joa. All of these institutions dismantled, totally destroyed. What was the cost of this acquiescence to these arbitrary acts? We will never be able to estimate. 1966, through deception, a flourishing multi-party democracy was destroyed. All political parties of Amazonia were destroyed and integrated into the CNU. The cost of this acquiescence to tyranny and oppression cannot be calculated in terms of human lives. It will take over 20 more years for our children to rise up on the streets of Amazonia to demand multipartism. It has cost the lives of thousands of people to demand the right to free speech, to establish political party, the right to political assembly, forming political association. The cost of acquiescence to the bullying and tyranny has shown to be far greater than the cost of resistance. Let us get into the economic loss. State Article 21, African Charter on Human and People's Rights, vests in the people alone, not the state, the right to freely dispose of their wealth and natural resources, and ordains that the right shall be exercised in the exclusive interests of the people. This is the economic dimension of the political right to self-determination. Acquiescence to tyranny and oppression because of the fear of the cost of resistance led to the complete destruction of Amazonian economic independence, which was the foundation of the creation of wealth and economic opportunities of our people. Supporting economic institutions totally wiped out, loss of resources in billions, collapse of the banking sector, no access to credit, consequential collapse of development initiatives. All Amazonian parastatals collapse, energy sector collapse, with corresponding consequences on economic development and wealth generation. We can spend our time calculating the cost of resistance without being able to calculate the cost of acquiescence to tyranny and oppression. We shall never be able to quantify the cost on the Amazonian society of our acquiescence to the destruction of our economic opportunities. I will not delve into the human cost, but I'll speak just of two incidences that are of relevance to you. The Obutu and Santa slaughters in September 1961. 1962, Mr. Zakaria Abendon, an Amazonian MP, butchered in Kekem. We can quantify from 1961 up till date, millions of Amazonians have been murdered because of our acquiescence to tyranny and oppression, and because of our emphasis on the cost of resistance. My people, as I said last time, our resistance today is not born out of a rejection of the last 62 years of colonial domination by Cameroon. The British were here 1847 to 1887. Kuva Likenye and others, their Songanis, their Bombis, they fought it. The Germans, 1887 to 1913. The British, 1913 to 1961. Cameroon, 1961 till date. All through these periods of colonial domination, Amazonians have resisted. A group of people have always asked us to calculate the cost of that resistance against the cost of acquiescence. This generation has decided to write the last chapter of hundreds of years of colonial domination, extortion, and exploitation. We'll do so with our blood, with our liberty, and with our life. Not only because we desire freedom, respect, and dignity, because for now, we know that the cost of acquiescence to tyranny and oppression and domination far outweighs the cost to resistance. Occupation has manifested itself from 1961 up till date through dispossession. It has erected symbols of occupation that we must worship. It has instituted political system which we must succumb to. Symbols of occupation which we have denounced and will continue to denounce and uproot and replace them. The Cameroon flag, we have made it absolutely clear, is banned in Amazonia. The blue and white is the authentic representation of the Amazonian people. And every Amazonian has an obligation to fly our flag with pride and take pride even in the consequences. Cameroon anthem is banned in Amazonia, replaced with the Hail, 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 the authentic representation of the Amazonian people and a reflection of its socioeconomic, political, and cultural trajectory. Cameroon institutions, be they economic, political, or social, as institutions enabling colonial occupation, they are all banned, and Amazonians must desist continuously from legitimizing these institutions. You begin to work within the quarters, within your communities, with our forces, and stop asking if you are asked to reject a particular institution of repression and occupation, what is the alternative? You are the alternative. You represent the Amazonian people. You represent transparency. You represent opportunity. You represent freedom of speech, independence, and you represent the right to self-determination. We live in Amazonia without ID cards. And I can tell you without any doubt that it was until 1962 that Cameroon extended into Amazonia. what they call the carte d'identité. After they had instituted in 1961 what they call the pass law that ensured that every Amazonian that moved from one point to the other had to receive a pass to be able to travel. It was used as a tool of control, as a tool of exerting Cameroon's power and domination over the Amazonian people. So before you ask about what shall we use if we don't have ID card, recall, before Cameroon, you never needed them. My fellow people, the institutions of occupation must be rejected by our people. They must be dismantled by our forces. Amazonia should be free from every institution that represents the colonial power. The agents of occupation, from the governors to the SDOs, to their impostors in the name of mayors, enablers in the name of parliamentarians and senators, do not represent the Amazonian people. They are part of the extension of the rule and reign of terror of Cameroon. And we must reject these agents. And we must begin to understand there are customary practices on how we can govern ourselves, from our neighborhood to our villages to our cities. There are alternative Amazonian institutions within Amazonia created by our forces, in community schools, in ATLA, and other institutions that oversee cases, that oversee policing, that oversee justice. We must begin to trust in what is Amazonian. We must begin to trust in our own creation. Apart from the symbols of occupation, there are also symbols of extortion. We have said repeatedly, there shall be no taxation without proper representation. There shall be no taxation without reciprocation in development. And Amazonians must stop paying taxes to Cameroon without questioning, without being able to rise up in awe and anger to ask why our hospitals have collapsed, why our institutions of education have become tools of colonial intoxication, why our roads are modeled with potholes, have become death traps where people go to die. You shall pay your taxes only to Amazonian institutions represented at this particular moment by our forces. You shall not provide opportunity for the enemy to accumulate resources to buy more arms and exert power and domination over you. These acts are acts of defiance, acts of rejection, and acts of self-governance. We shall not wait until we control all of our territory before we feel we are free. Freedom is in the mind, it's in the heart. When you believe it, you claim it. And you will claim it block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood, issue by issue. We have continuously also identified processes of colonial domination, which we have outlawed in Amazonia. They have asked you time and again to celebrate the 11th of February as a day that the United Nations and the United Kingdom connive with each other to deny you full sovereignty over your land. And the enemy has transformed it into Youth Day, which they've deceived and coerced you into celebrating. We have rejected these days. 20th of May is the day the enemy unilaterally abrogated its own transformation of its own constitution into La Constitution Federal. It now created a unitary state on its way to reenacting its 1960 independence and telling Amazonians that your country is finally fully occupied. These are all symbols we must reject. These are all processes we must reject. These things come with a cost, and Amazonians must stop calculating the cost of resistance without calculating the cost of acquiescence and the cost of surrender. Fellow people, each time we calculate the cost of resistance, each time we talk about the pain in resistance, we must remind ourselves about those who are in jail. They live in squalor. They live sometimes under very difficult situations. They are young men and women. They're all like pound for educators, engineers, mechanics, drivers who suddenly lost their liberty because they stood up for our country. They stood up for all of us. Their continuous incarceration, their continuous dehumanization cannot be quantified in terms of its cost. Many of them have been chained to their wooden beds and they've died agonizing death without family, without friends, without loved ones. They decided to pay the ultimate price for Ambazonia. All of them have the opportunity to denounce Ambazonia, beg for forgiveness, and some of them may gain their freedom. Why do you think they have not chosen that option? Less costly and may lead them to freedom. Why? Because they calculate the cost of betrayal. They know there are thousands of our people buried in unmarked graves because they stood for them, because they stood for us. We have prisoners who have lost everything. Prisoners with children, babies who've never seen their dads. We have prisoners with old mothers, mothers dying slow death because they've lost their children in the hands of barbarians. We have husbands who've not set eyes on their wives for many years. They have not blinked. They have not compromised. They have not given up. Let's quantify the cost of that separation and compare it with the cost of resistance by people who basically live in our homeland. There are prisoners who may not be able to identify their children. There are prisoners who will be trained to walk again because they've been locked up in tiny enclosures for many years without the right to training, without the right sometimes to family visitations. There are prisoners whose dignity has been wrapped in mud, taken away, in the kinds of food that they eat, in the tiny spaces where they sleep, in the kinds of sanitation where they go to the toilet, going from weeks and weeks without shower. In the name of Ambazonia, they have not blinked. They have not calculated the cost of the loss of their liberty. They have not calculated the cost or even the loss of their lives. They've remained defiant, bent. They've organized lockdowns in jails. They've risen up in jail. They've spoken from jail. They have still screamed at the top of their voices in defiance of an enemy that had them in captivity. They have calculated the cost of freedom as against the cost of acquiescence to tyranny and oppression. My fellow people, I can tell you today without doubt, with all quantifiable evidence, extrapolated from other situations, the cost of blinking is uncalculatable. The cost of acquiescence to Cameroon, the cost of shortcuts, the cost of submission, the cost of refusing to stand up and pay the ultimate price for our homeland. We have seen from 1961 till today what we have lost in terms of the economic sector. Airports all closed, seaports abandoned, roads abandoned, infrastructures totally collapsed, health institutions collapse. That is the cost this generation has to pay, because some people yesteryears asked us to calculate the cost of resistance as against the cost of acquiescence to tyranny and oppression. That is why we will do everything humanly possible to make sure we do not transfer that cost to the next generation. We will take every step we can to make sure we defeat and vanquish Cameroon now and pass over to the next generation a free homeland. We will pay the price if Amazonia will have to be free. That is why I can tell you today that the decision made by our forces in Mezam, banning yellow color taxis and instituting the blue and white color for Amazonian taxis, has become an Amazonian national liberation law that every state in Amazonia must institute. Every taxi from Victoria right up to Ndop must eliminate the yellow color and adopt the Amazonian color, not only as a mark of defiance and rejection of colonialism, but as a mark of solidarity to all those who've gone before us, to all those who've lost their liberty because of the struggle for Amazonian freedom. I can also tell you today that car registrations, called categories, all drivers must stop paying these huge sums to the treasury of the enemy. Windscreen license, called vignette, are also banned. We don't want to find any car with a windscreen license. You must reject it as an act of defiance. The roadworthy, or what they call visit technique, that you pay must be rejected. The parking fee must also be rejected. The patent and transport licenses are all banned in Amazonia. In this time of resistance, we must reject any coercion by the colonial authorities and make sure that all of our acts constitute and are seen as our own contribution to the national resistance against Cameroon for the interests of our prisoners, our IDPs, our refugees, and others who've lost their lives. My fellow people, the cost of acquiescence to tyranny and oppression far outweighs the cost of resistance. Beginning tomorrow, the colors in Amazonia have to change. We are asking all of our people to embrace these acts of resistance. We are asking all of our taxi drivers to reject Cameroon and make a pledge of allegiance to Amazonia. Cameroon is no longer coming back. All the noise by the colonial SDO will be shown of its emptiness in the coming weeks. It is not a struggle between the order of a colonial SDO who oversees the dispossession in Amazonia with the orders of the Amazonian people. As I have said, it is not a question between Cameroon and Amazonia. It is not an act simply between our forces and the colonial occupation forces. It is an act of resistance which we must accept at this state to free our homeland from the tyranny of the oppressor. My fellow people, we will be taking other measures in the months ahead. I will be announcing other measures that will ensure Amazonia's independence, delineation of its borders and practices that shows us internationally as an independent state. We will be taking measures that will impose a cost, even at the moral level, against any individual, groups of individuals and states that continue to sell arms, to fund, to channel resources to Cameroon to continue with its barbarism and torment of the Amazonian people and even the Cameroonian people. The world must make a conscious choice today to choose between freedom and tyranny, between peace and justice, and occupation and oppression. It's not a difficult decision to make. My fellow people, this is the turning point as we escalate. We want to remind each of you, collaboration with Cameroon is treason. Consciously or unconsciously facilitating and enabling their activities in Amazonia, knowing the cost on our people, knowing the price people in jail pay, knowing the price families have paid with the loss of their loved ones. It's unacceptable. All Amazonians must take a stand for our country. All Amazonians must take a stand for our people. Lastly, I talked last time about the residence obligation law. The relevant departments are yet to set the institutions of implementation, and I'll allow them to do that, and we'll move forward. It's taken into effect in the next few months. I will be able to explain that to you. We'll direct our forces on implementation. All Cameroonians will live by the rules instituted in Amazonia, or will show them the door. We have said repeatedly, the lack of protest, the lack of solidarity by the Cameroonian people, their complicity with the regime of terror and genocide has compelled us to revisit our hospitality since the period of the Maquisard, and we will institute policies to remind them that if you continue to stay silent, you provide support to the enemy that carries genocide in our land. If you continue to take part in the dispossession of Amazonians of their land and their opportunities in employment and resources, you are guilty of collaboration and enabling a system of dispossession. Our people must remain steadfast in the face of this escalation. We must be bonded together. We must speak truth to power. We must show solidarity with our people. We must calculate the cost of acquiescence, and we must all take a stand to end the nightmare that entered our territory on the 1st of October 1961. This is a generation of defiance. This is a generation that has decided not to transfer the cost to the next generation. This is the generation that has decided to lay the foundation for economic prosperity for Amazonia. This is the generation that is working on the economic foundation of our new state, the educational foundation of our new state, the political foundation of a free and independent Amazonia that will embrace tolerance and compromise, pluralism to ensure every Amazonian, the sprinters, the marathonists, the crippled, the blind, the dumb, the deaf, have equal opportunity protected by the law. God bless you all.
Reporting from Baba Kitungo. Watch and see what is happening in the palace. You see the population. We have about 10,000 people here holding the flag. This is our flag. It shall remain here until the day we have our independence. The day is not up.
Hail this land of glory. We the Amazonians pledge our loyalty. Praise the soul of Savior who granted us the freedom. And legends to the hero who called the lonely diablo. Glory to glory, we rise and never to fall. Here in a nation flowing with earth and holy. Glory, glory, glory to the Father for making you a nation, a joy forevermore. Amazonia, land of freedom, you shall live in plenty, meet in our need. And your children shall be like the stars above. The Most High God being the watchman of this nation. Amazonia, land of freedom, you shall live in plenty, meet in our need. And your children shall be like the stars above. The Most High God being the watchman of this nation.
We've come here to tell the United Nations that the land they mortgaged to Cameroon will be recaptured by the brilliant people of Amazonia.
Right. Yes.
That the complicity they had with the United Kingdom will be dampened. That your spirit, the indomitable spirit that has led you from your homes right here to this